All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Um, Lots of people are away tonight. And I know that not everybody has had a chance to fully review the book. So it might be a shorter night, which is just fine, but we'll have some good conversation. Tonight, we're looking at Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Actually, my favorite Chronicle of Narnia book. So I've got a couple chapters left, but I'm fairly familiar with the book. So I should be okay to kind of facilitate a discussion. If you were in person, I have a simple sheet that has really 6 slots on it. So arriving back in Narnia, I kind of grouped it by theme rather than chapter by chapter. So arriving back in Narnia, kind of taking on the first 5 chapters. What did we learn from Eustace, chapter 6 to 7? The Island of Deadly Gold, chapter 8. The Duffel Puds, chapters 9 to 11. The Dark Island, chapter 12. And then the End of the World as they kind of get to the end of their voyage, 13 to 16. So to begin with, we have 2 instead of 4 of the Pembensee's children that feature in this book. The older kids, life is starting to move on for them, and we'll remember in Prince Caspian that that Aslan actually told Peter and Susan that they wouldn't be coming back to Narnia. And so Peter is preparing to write an exam. He's with Professor Kirk, who has lost his fortune and is living in austere times. And then Susan has gone with mother and father to America. And so Lucy, hey, there's your video, Carol. Lucy and Edmund are staying with Aunt Alberta and Uncle Harold. And they have a young son named Eustace, who has been brought up in a very different way than the Pevensey children. And so what were some of the things that you noticed as they stare at the Narnian ship in the painting in Lucy's guest bedroom? What do you think of Eustace's formation, the way that he's being raised?
Well, I was going to make a comment about the ship.
Yeah.
First of all, it's interesting that the painting or photo was in Lucy's room,
Yes.
and that she immediately recognizes as a Narnian ship.
Yeah.
And as they're watching it, it's like it's sailing straight toward them.
Right.
So it's like very real.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's curious why she is drawn to it, but Aunt Alberta doesn't like, but it doesn't say any more about why Aunt Alberta doesn't like it.
Right. So in some ways, there's a bit of a foil here. So Lewis likes certain things and dislikes certain things. And it seems that Alberta and Harold kind of embody a lot of the things, the way that the world is changing, in a way that Lewis does not like. I'm hearing some voices, so I'm just going to guide people here in case they're here for me.
Hopefully he's really hearing voices and not hearing voices.
Sorry, that's the AA.
How is your
Um, So it seems to me that part of what's happening with that draw to the picture is that the different the change in philosophy, the change in the age. Lewis, in some ways, hungers from the older age. And so we even see it with Eustace, and we've seen it in other places. You know, he's read none of the right kind of books. He only reads books that have information, tables and charts and things like that. And so I think that Eustace, being a product of his parents, this picture embodies what the Pevensey children long for, and Aunt Alberta and Eustace and his father dislike about the world, about the old age.
Anti-adventure and pleasure. They're kind of anti-adventure and
Right.
anti-pleasure. They're teetotalers and they don't smoke, so they're anti-pleasure.
Yeah. And they're vegetarians.
Yeah.
Eustace calls them Alberta and Harold, not mother and father. Eustace has never been spanked.
I'm not sure he's ever been disciplined in any way.
Right. So there's definitely some formative stuff that's happening here, right? And in fact, Lucy and Edmund are in this place that they really don't like, and they are longing for Narnia. And in some ways, that becomes what draws them in. So they go from looking at the picture to the picture really coming to life, to finding themselves in the sea and being pulled up on this Narnian ship. It's 3 years after Prince Caspian has taken the throne, and they are back in Narnia. What do you think about what is happening with the Dawn Treader? The Telmarines did not like the sea, and so were not seafaring people. And so this is something that Caspian is bringing back. Why is it? What is his mission? What are they doing on this ship?
Well, he's looking for the seven lords that were sent out by his uncle, who were friendly with his father,
Right.
and his more with his point of view of how things should be.
Right. Yeah. So they were supportive of King Caspian and Prince Caspian, and it was either flee or lose their lives. So they fled. So there seems to be an issue of honor. Why is it honorable for them to take this trip? Well, I'll answer my own question. I think friendship, duty are some of the things that we've looked at in some of the other the other stuff. And again, Eustace and his formation provide kind of a foil. There's a lot of selfishness in this new philosophy, or maybe better, self-centeredness. The shift of authority is to the individual person, and there's the breakdown of community. And so Narnia embodies this earlier time of responsibility to one another. And so just as they prove their faithfulness to Caspian's father and to Caspian himself, Caspian is now rewarding that faithfulness by being faithful himself. He takes a vow and sets out to find them, honor them, or avenge them, depending on what their fate was.
Is adventure to Lewis, like, is that a virtue, like to go on adventure, be in adventure, or is that a result of character that you would accept adventure, or you would accept those risks because you have virtue and character?
So yeah, well, we see in Lewis and particularly in the person of Reepicheep. I mean, Reepicheep almost embodies this to a ridiculous degree, right? That it would be cowardice to turn back. So if one has a duty, even if there's danger, they must face it. Adventure itself can be seen as bad or good, depending on the person. So if you think of a book like The Hobbit, hobbits are usually fat, lazy, and stupid. They enjoy their comforts and they don't really want to go home. They don't like Gandalf because Gandalf is kind of an unknown, an upsetting commodity. And so when Bilbo Baggins is greeted by Gandalf, or rather greets Gandalf at his door, he wants nothing to do with him and wants nothing to do with an adventure. But Gandalf kind of thrust it on him. We see later in Lord of the Rings, Frodo has kind of a craving to go on adventure. And once Bilbo's had his adventure, the craving is there. But adventure is facing the challenges of life and not shirking away from it. So it's not settling for the status quo. So there's always a level of danger, which leads to a level of growth. So I think what's desirable is not so much flinging oneself headlong into danger, but to do what's right, and being willing to have adventure, knowing that even on that adventure, things will not go the way we can't foresee the end. And so we will be honorable, which leads to its own sort of growth, and virtue is reward unto itself. So even if there's an end while being virtuous, that's fine. That's a good end. Like Reepicheep to face an enemy and that outnumbers or outmatches, outskills, that's an honorable end. And so that's a good in itself. But if we go through the adventure and we survive, we also grow. We become different people. And I mean, we all have that in our own lives, right? To face things that are difficult, to do it even though it's difficult, to take our lumps and come through the other side. We have grown, we are more skilled, we are more experienced, we have better perspective as a result.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But it seems to me there's also a joy or an excitement, or I'm not quite sure, an anticipation.
Yeah.
They leap ahead.
Yes.
They don't hold back.
Yes. And sometimes that can be born out of skill and experience and knowledge. And other times it can be born out of folly and stupidity, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
we see that with Eustace at one point. Later on, when we have the sea serpent, he does the first kind of heroic thing that he does as a boy. And this is following his dragonation and undragonation. He hacks away at the sea serpent. He is useless, doesn't do anything but destroy Caspian's second best sword, but it's well done. So yeah, so there that's out of, in some way, fear and necessity and ignorance, and in some ways folly. He could have gotten hurt. At other times, though, it's a great characteristic. And again, Reepicheep kind of embodies that. So he certainly has joy and kind of the lust for battle, right? Is part of the knight's code. It's not that you go out picking a fight, but there's a joy to even battle. So yeah, you're right, Mom.
Yeah. It strikes me the milieu of boys together.
Brotherhood.
The brother, yes, it's that kind of, even I think even crusading.
Yeah.
I think that the crusade stuff, they went off in that sort of upbeat.
Yes.
Yeah, which strikes me as a very old kind of.
Yeah.
It's kind of like everybody went off to the First World War.
Yes.
They were excited. They were, I think, looking forward to it. They were
Yeah.
going to get the Germans, and this could be great. And then it all goes awry.
Yeah. Well, it's the conviction of doing what's right and doing what's good. And then, of course, I mean, with the First World War, we had a different kind of warfare than the world had ever seen. And it was just horrific, right? Because suddenly we have, I mean, with the musket in the Civil War, let's say, or the War of 1812, I mean, there's still a fighting chance. It was still pretty horrific, but nothing compared to the First World War and then the wars after that. I mean, so yeah, you're quite right.
Mm-hmm.
So anything else in the first 5 chapters? We have getting on to that first island. We have them being taken into slavery, and then the whole show of force and the putting aside of slave trading. We have Eustace and Reepicheep coming to a head. We have Eustace and his approach to the water when everybody is thirsty. So anything that you want to talk about kind of in that section, we're good to do. So as a scene of the disembarking party, this pretty accurate way that slaving occurred some of the islands historically. often, there's kind of like animals in the wild, right? Picking off the weak ones in the herd or the ones that get separated from the larger body. And so you have these young people they are armed, but in some ways, Lewis, as the narrator, comments that it was kind of a foolish thing for them to do. And then, of course, there's these slavers and they get taken. They really don't have a chance to fight. But then fate is kind and Caspian is recognized. So the plan is they can't take these islands by force. So they pretend as if they are a bigger force than they actually are. They put on some pomp and some circumstance, and they're able to retake these islands without battle. That kind of tells us some stuff too. Again, Lewis refers to the right kind of books. So again, he is attempting to write the right kind of books. So the strategy is something that we should pay attention to. And again, I think that we have the clash of the days between the governor of the Lone Islands and Caspian. You have to make an appointment, and you can only have an appointment every second Thursday between 9 and 10. And then you have to fill out forms and you have to, so, you're confronted with an army and somebody's turning over your table and you're still talking about the right forms and interviews and having a meeting and that kind of thing. And some of the argument sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking that is a very prophetic piece
Okay.
of life developing, because it has developed with more and more farms.
Yes.
I mean, we're just buried in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I find that interesting because usually Lewis looks back.
Right.
Now
he's not treating that like it's a good thing or desirable, because Caspian comes in and overturns that.
Yeah.
System.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's there. And certainly a contemporary reality. I mean, we all are enjoying it because we fill out so many forms.
Right. Yeah.
And the computer has not reduced the number of forms we fill out.
Yes. The governor's response, Compass's response about the possibility of overturning slavery. Historically, that was the excuse for not abolishing slavery is as soon as it could have been, because the economy depends on it. So we can't possibly stop.
Why does Lewis want to address slavery?
Well, I think.
I mean, he's well past it.
Sorry?
He's well past it in terms of society.
Well, it might just be he needs to fill out the story. So this is a theme.
Okay.
But again,
Yeah.
it's a mirror to our own world. And, perhaps the vestiges of slavery were not or are not all that cleared up.
I also think he's writing to an audience that, have no experience of slavery or what that might have been like for someone, or the opposite of, the arguments for why it should continue. And then Caspian says, yes, but it's not bringing in anything. It's not bringing any product,
Yeah,
nothing that's benefiting anybody.
Yeah.
Except
Yeah.
you guys.
Yeah.
So I thought it's, again, down that road, getting people to think.
yes. Yeah, so you're right. That's a good, it provides a good contrast of what good is and what isn't. Well, they get off the island and they get in for a storm. And he really writes that well, I think. Could you, as he talked about that deep valley opening up and the ship is plunging down into it, I mean, could you imagine that scene and how people must be feeling like on the Titanic when it's split in half? Well, the focus kind of becomes on Eustace and his behavior, and then the water rations in particular. So at this point, we want to start asking the question, what do we think of Eustace at this point, his formation, the kind of a character that he has? What are we meant to be noticing about him?
Well, as you said earlier, very self-centered.
Yeah.
It's all about him and how everything affects him.
Yeah.
And it can only be seen from his point of view.
Right. And so how does that play out in this chapter?
Well, he justifies his trying to get extra water, and then, when he's caught, denies that he was even trying to do that.
Right.
Yeah. Kind of tries to bend reality, like his weird, like if people are perspiring, then they'll cool down, then they don't really need as much water, so that people who are rowing and working don't need as much water. Like,
Yeah.
selfish way tries to bend reality to.
Yeah. So an interesting question. At one point, Lucy is obviously a peacemaker. So she actually starts to give him some of her water under the excuse, girls don't need as much water. What do you think of that?
Well, it's not true, but she was just making up a reason why she was giving it to him that he would accept.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of covering his honor a little bit, to merciful.
Okay. Help him to save face.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you feel like Lewis is supporting Little White Lies to grease the social wheels, or what?
Or does Lewis think that women don't need as much water?
Well, do
I mean,
the readers
technically, if your
do the
body is-
readers think that women don't need as much water, or think that Lewis thinks women don't need as much water?
I would think Lewis would think that. I mean, women's bodies are smaller.
Okay.
So proportionately, I mean, you require pound for pound the same amount, but there's fewer pounds in women.
Oh, I see. So percentage
Then
wise,
math.
you think there might be some truth in it?
So I think there might be.
Okay.
Um,
That's all right.
When you ask that question, it kind of reminds me of the woman series that you did a while ago, sermons.
Oh, yes, yeah,
And a number of the women, the way they dealt with things was to tell lies,
right. Yeah.
because that was the only weapon they had.
Yeah. A different kind of power to exercise.
Mhm. So
Yeah.
this, to me, is similar.
It's a good observation. All right.
It does seem to support it because it's it is a kindness, or it's being done to move somebody forward or help.
Right. Well, it certainly helps the dynamic of the ship. Although it may not help Eustace come to terms with himself. But
Yeah,
we are
it's just a temporary patch.
right. Yeah. So it's kind of situational.
And nobody ever seems like they try to fix him. Like nobody tries to make him change, or there's no sitting him down. Like it's kind of like, there he goes again.
Right. So this is the character. We need to deal with this person, and the dealing is to be bothered, annoyed, but to be as courteous as possible, as long as it allows.
Yeah. And no, like we're gonna fix him or change him, or we're gonna sit him down and have a good talking and then he'll change. Just this is what we're dealing with.
Right. Okay. Well,
He actually starts avoiding them too, because it talks about him spending all day in bed, basically.
right. And is it any wonder why they nickname him Useless? I think they do that in the movie. I don't think they do that in the book.
You know, and they're not trying to change him, but they certainly do make cutting remarks
Right.
that if he had a thinner skin, might actually, hit the mark.
Right. Or a sense of humor might help him to actually laugh at himself a little bit, and that would be helpful.
Right.
I can't remember where it comes in, but I was struck this time reading. Maybe it's when he's post-dragon, that it talks about a lot of this being rooted in his fear of people.
Oh yeah, that's definitely later.
Yeah. So let's talk about Eustace the dragon. How is Eustace becoming a dragon the cure for Eustace's character? What are your thoughts?
The one that was interesting before he even gets there, when he was so happy the dragon died beside him,
Yeah.
is he began to feel as if he had fought and killed the dragon instead of merely seeing it die.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I kind of thought of like video games, like that false sense of having accomplished or having been in danger and accomplished or avoided danger or tackled danger, but all in a unreal. But that same like rush to the brain and
Yeah. So claiming a valor that isn't his.
yeah.
Yeah. Which again is a character flaw from Lewis's point of view for sure.
Mhm.
And then there is a line in that section too, where, he's woken up because of the pain in his arm, because of
Yeah.
the bracelet around his arm. In spite of the pain, his first feeling was one of relief. There was nothing to be afraid of anymore. He
Mhm.
was a terror himself now, and nothing in the world but a knight, and not all of those would dare to attack him. He could get even with Caspian Edmund now.
That's what I was remembering. Yes.
But the moment he thought this, he realized that he didn't want to. He wanted to be friends.
Right.
He wanted to get back among humans and talk and laugh and share things.
So we have this formation that occurs, but then there's also this internal drive for his character, which is this fear. He's afraid of Caspian. He's afraid of Lucy. He's afraid of Edmund. He's afraid of the world, and it drives him to be the way he has been, which is it's self-isolating. Self-centered leads to self-isolation. Nobody wants to be friends with him because he will not be friends with anybody. And it seems that is largely because he is afraid. I think that's important to pay attention to. Fear is a motto that I've adopted probably this last year. Fear is a terrible master. When fear is in control, it leads to so many bad things. I mean, anger quite often is a byproduct of fear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure that a
Yeah.
couple of years ago, my word of the year was fear to notice, because it always done physically brave things, read dumb things probably. I kind of thought fear wasn't a challenge, and when I really was honest about how I made decisions, how often fear was what really drove
Okay.
what I
Yeah.
thought would be decisive, but really is I want uncertainty away from me and I want this to go the way I want it to go.
Right. So in your fear, that led to take control.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a wonderful insight. Thank you for sharing that. Well, seems to me that when we have metamorphosis in these types of stories, there's always a fitness to what the person is transformed into. So quite often in stories like in the Fairy Queen, when somebody is in the power of lust, they'll be turned into pigs or guinea pigs. A fitness to the transformation, and seems to me that he says it of himself when he's undragoned, but he's beastly. He's a beastly person, and so
Mhm.
his outside matches his inside. But as I've said in sermon series, here we have judgment has fallen, right? He's gone to sleep dreaming dragonish dreams, and he's woken up a dragon. Judgment has fallen in that moment, right? Judgment can come immediately, we see in scripture. It also is coming at the end, but the judgment that comes now is grace, because it's meant to awaken us and lead us out again, right? So his becoming a dragon is both a fit punishment, is a fit reflection on who he has been in our entire story, but it is also grace, because as Mary just said, at the very moment that he realizes he's a dragon, he feels that power, he recognizes he need not be afraid anymore, and that he can get back at the people that he's been angry with. In that moment, he recognizes that he is truly cut off from the world of men. And And it's at that moment that he desires it the most. He longs for companionship, fellowship, as Carol said earlier, to be a part of that brotherhood of humankind. So in some ways, Eustace's adventure starts now. He's been taken, right? Like he's found himself in Narnia. He wasn't longing for Narnia. The water started to move in the painting. He didn't want to be a part of it. He was feeling sick. He was trying to end it out of his fear, or like to control the situation, to dash the picture down. And instead, he foolishly, in his folly, finds himself in the situation that he does not want to be in. He has been luggage on the entire voyage up to now. He's been a slave, and an unwanted one at that. For the first time, he decides to go off. The first time, it is a reaction to not wanting to work, but it's really the first time that he has been an actor in this story. He made a decision to leave. He made an attempt to get down. He decided to avoid the rain, to take some treasure. He fell asleep. And so now Eustace really begins his adventure for the first time, because he becomes a full-fledged character in the story for the first time. Complaining is not acting.
And it's the first time kind of reality breaks in. Like maybe he wonders, like, hey, have I really been a nice person as I thought I? The first time, like a little bit of reality starts to break into.
So self-reflection.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. And isn't it interesting that it's by becoming a dragon that he can actually see himself for the first time? Up to this point, he has been blind to his own character. So he's so self-centered, so selfish, that he can't even see himself
Mhm.
until he loses himself. And then he's able to gain some perspective. And so as the story progresses, he desires to reunite, to be with the group again. He recognizes in his selfishness, he has misjudged his traveling companion's character, and he knows in an instant that he had misjudged him, that they would never leave him. And so he goes and he joins them, and useless becomes useful.
Mhm.
We have this wonderful dynamic of Reepicheep and Eustace the dragon. Now, from the very first moment that Reepicheep meets Eustace, Eustace speaks discourteously to him. The next encounter we have is Eustace grabbing Reepicheep's tail, swinging him around, and then being smacked with the flat of the blade, black and blue. And then we have the guarding of the water. So the pricking of the hand, or the revelation of the attempted theft that Reepicheep points out. So we have this animosity up to this point, but it's Reepicheep who is present. Talk about that a little bit. What's going on in this situation?
Well, I think Reepicheep has a real sense of what it's like to be different
Okay.
than the others around you.
Okay. So he's empathetic in a way that the others can't be.
That's right.
Okay. That's a really good insight. Other thoughts?
That sense of honor, he's also the one who gets mad at Master Rince for speaking, daring to leave Eustace or suggesting it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The first one who speaks up to correct him.
Okay, so it begs the question, is Reepicheep's engaging with the dragon Eustace cold duty or mere duty that he's exercising? This is a traveling companion. It's a relative of the king and the queen. Is this simply courtesy?
No, I think he really cares about him,
Okay,
and he's seeing a change
yeah,
in Eustace. So he's using this opportunity to talk to him, but
yeah. So it may even be possible that Reepicheep and his courtesy, even in some of the encounters earlier with Eustace, is what actually is at work in Eustace when he becomes a dragon, so that Eustace knows that he misjudges the character. Because while he hasn't liked Reepicheep and the way he has functioned in his life up to this point, he can judge that character accurately. And that character is a reflection of the crew and its leadership at large. And so in some ways, we could say that it is Reepicheep, even before Eustace becomes a dragon, that helps Eustace to become a better person, simply by being good or righteous. And then we add to that at this point, fruits of the spirit, right? The character of love holds no accounts of wrong. Well, it's lovely, and it is humanizing, right? Eustace becomes a better boy because he has become a dragon and he has been loved as a dragon in a way that he would not allow himself to be loved as a boy. And so things are coming to a crisis. The ship has to go. And so what's going to happen with Eustace? He is reformed. And so something needs to happen, right? The enchantment has done its work. So now he needs to become disenchanted. And how does that occur? What is the cure for being a dragon? Well, I will tell you, Eustace hears a voice, the voice. Well, before we get there, we should also say Edmund is the one who meets with Eustace and hears the story of his undragoning. Why do you think it's significant that it's Edmund?
he was also rescued by Aslan.
Right. Edmund is actually the person who is able to say to Eustace, I was worse.
Mhm.
While you were an ass, I was a traitor. And so again, we have kind of that growth that we were talking about earlier, right? Edmund, it would have been far better that he would never betrayed, would have been far better. And yet now there is a gift on the other side of grace, on the other side of that forgiveness, on the other side of redemption. There is a gift that can still be given out of this. He's able to show kindness, use this, and be the first voice to welcome back. And so we have almost Jesus and Peter on the seashore, end of John's gospel, this restoration that goes on. And what happened was the lion shows up. And we have some indication of the lion's presence in Eustace's story. The fog that led to him going down the wrong way, kind of like the fog on the Mount of Transfiguration, kind of like the fog that we saw in A Horse and His Boy.
Mhm.
You remember Core sees it in the bright light of day and thinks, oh, I was lucky I didn't go over that cliff.
Mm.
And so Aslan shows up. There's light everywhere he steps. It looks like moonlight. And he beckons Eustace to follow him. He doesn't speak, and yet it's as clear as day that he is to follow, and so he does. And we have this baptismal scene. So we think of a Romans 6 passage. In the early church, the way baptism happened was you disrobed. You went down into the water naked, and you came up and you received a white robe to indicate your newness of life, the death to the old, newness of life, the joining of the body, the participation in the life of the saints. And so Eustace needs baptism. He has this reformation of character that has occurred. So his behavior is changed. He now belongs. And so now he needs to believe. So he's heard about Aslan. Now he encounters Aslan. And so the command is to disrobe. And he realizes that dragons have skins like snakes. He has these claws. So 3 times, and 3 again is a significant number biblically, right? Kind of a completeness to it. 3 times he peels the skin, and he is still not able to get into the water yet. He's still not disrobed. And for me, this is the moment that is at the very center of the book, and is the reason why I come back to this story so often. Aslan says, you must let me do it.
Yeah.
And so then the lion said, you will have to let me undress you. I was afraid of his claws, I can tell you, but I was pretty nearly desperate now. So I just lay flat down on my back to let him do it. The very first tear he made was so deep that I thought it had gone right into my heart. And when he began pulling the skin off, it hurt worse than anything I've ever felt. The only thing that made me able to bear it was just the pleasure of feeling the stuff peel off. If you've ever picked the scab off a sore place, it hurts like billy-o, but it is such fun to see it coming away. You have to let me do it. So we have this encounter with Christ, Spirit of Christ with Aslan. And there's this cleansing, this process that is painful, but it's effective, right? Eustace's best efforts. I mean, he has dragon's claws. His best efforts. He takes layer after layer, but not enough to hurt himself. But it's Aslan that tears into him. The new life comes at a cost, right? Eustace has to lay himself down on his back. When you see a dog do that, that is that submissive pose. There's submission in Eustace here. So for me, it's just a wonderful scene. Reminds me of the importance of baptism and the overwhelming grace of God.
Reminds you of that character in The Great Divorce that gets offered. He has that little evil.
The lizard on his
The
shoulder.
lizard, yeah, that's right.
Right,
And
yeah.
he gets offered, like, I can touch this, but it will nearly kill you.
Yeah, yeah. And you can feel the heat.
Yeah.
Yes. And what's interesting about that connection that you just made is in that scene, the lizard, as it is, wrenched off of the man and cast down, becomes a beautiful stallion. And the man becomes able to enter. He becomes what he is meant to be, right? There's, again, further transformation. It's good. And then he's dressed. So we have kind of, again, Gospel of John, the scene of Jesus washing the feet of his disciples, right? He undresses, he dresses, that servant's work. And so even while we have the lion, we also have the lamb that was slain in this scene, which of course points towards the end as well of the book. Well, it would be nice and fairly true to say that from that time forth, Eustace was a different boy. To be strictly accurate, he began to be a different boy. So we've got the already and the not yet. He had relapses. There were still many days when he could be very tiresome, but most of those I shall not notice. The cure had begun. And so we can actually understand the piercing of the claws feeling like into the heart is almost the injection of the cure, right? It's begun to take hold, and there is this developmental perspective that will come to fruition in the age to come. Well, we have the narrow escape with the sea serpent. I don't know if you really have anything to talk about there. I'm happy to talk about it. We noted Eustace ruining Caspian's sword. And then we have this next island and this pool of water that fortunately they came to second. After they had washed themselves drunk and refreshed, they come to the second pool and discover some unique properties to it. Anything that touches the water turns to gold. What did you think of the scene that proceeds from that discovery? Did you get that far? Well, you could say there's a little bit of gold fever that occurs.
Yeah.
Caspian claims the island.
He loses his head.
Yeah. Anything that you dip into this water becomes solid gold. And so he swears everyone to secrecy. How does that warn us that something's wrong?
Secrecy.
Secrecy, yeah. How does that warn us that something's wrong?
If you can't tell people, then is it really honorable? Does it show character? If your first thought is I can't tell anybody.
Right. So there's the issue of concealment, and not being forthright, not being honest. Yeah, that's good. So what's the gold statue at the bottom of that pool?
It's one of the lords he was looking for.
So what's the risk of keeping this secret so that you can exploit the pool?
Someone else might die.
Right.
Hmm.
So this is, again, similar to the slavery conversation, right? What does this really give us? Does this really produce for us? Well, fortunately, Aslan makes an appearance, brief though it is, and the enchantment fades. They come away from it with no memory, but a sense that they have narrowly escaped disaster. And so they have the sense that they should name the island Deathwater. And that presumably is not concealed. So I think we have a little reminder that much mischief can be done by the desire for wealth gotten in suspect ways. Wow. Then we come to kind of the next little major section, which is the monopads. And so they come to this nice little island that is like an English garden, so well manicured and kept. There's these invisible enemies. What did you make of the monopads, or the duffel puffs, as they will become later on? Did you enjoy the dynamic of the chief voice and all the others as they enthusiastically say things like, "Keep it up, chief, keep it up. That's right, that's right."
It was actually irritating.
Irritating.
Yeah. They just went along with the crowd,
Yeah.
basically.
Not to mention the fairly foolish statements of, "You got to be careful of water, it's powerful wet." So they have a story. This island has a magician. They've served the magician. But one day the magician gives them an order that they just don't want to do. So he uglifies them. They can't stand looking at their own ugliness. And so they sneak up to his room and they cast the spell to make things invisible. But now they have grown tired of being invisible. And so they have done what they have determined, that the next time a party comes to the island that has a young girl, they will force her to cast the spell to make them visible again upon pain of death.
I appreciate the gentleness of the magician and his hope and his ability to see like what is coming, like that Aslan is coming, returning, sort of that he can see that it's not now, but not now.
Yes, yes.
And he has full hope and confidence in that, so he can be patient.
There's almost what we would call dispensations, though I don't mean that in a Schofield Bible sort of way, like we talked about when we did Book of Revelation, but in history, there's kind of the development of humanity and what's needed. And I would say that Lewis is probably thinking through an old perspective. You know, the Old Testament, you had an earlier form of humanity, and so it just needed a law, you know, a fearsome God, a law, threat of reward and punishment. And then with the New Testament, you're kind of in this new era that you don't need those things anymore. We can put aside the law now. We can operate by just grace and love, by the influence of the Spirit. And so I'm not saying that's Lewis's dichotomy, but with the wizard, you know, he talks about, I look forward to a time when they can grow and mature and develop enough that I don't have to use this rough magic to govern them with. But you know, I can govern them because they are mature enough to care for their own welfare. So part of the stupidity of the chief and the stupidity of the people, oh yeah, keep it up, yeah, you're doing great, he had never spoke a true word, is part of the marking out that they are not ready for rational government because they're not rational enough yet.
Mhm.
They are reasonable enough yet. They, you know, despite him saying, look, there's a closer stream that you can do this job with, and it's going to benefit you and in so many ways in the long run, and they couldn't see it. And instead they just interpret it of he has a will, kind of the way a lot of people would look at God, right? He's up there, he's calling a shot, he's telling me what to do, and I don't want to do it. And, you know, when 1 minute thinking that he sees all and he knows all and he can do terrible things and will do terrible things, and the next minute thinking he won't see me trying to do this, and it's the simplest, most childish trick kind of thing, right? So there's that kind of a dynamic going on in the story. And it's interesting. I'm not sure where that would place us. In the, again, if this is a mirror, I'm not sure where we're at in terms of being ruled. But Lucy goes, and the scene, the chapter with her going through the spells, I just love. So there's a couple, we have some more time here. There's a couple that I think is really important. There's the spell to be beautiful beyond words or whatever that is. It was interesting in the movie, and this is Rowan Williams makes this point in his lecture on the Chronicles of Narnia. In the movies, Lucy is made to look like Susan. And so as she considers the spell and she sees the version of herself is not necessarily that dynamically most beautiful girl. It's actually Susan overlaid on Lucy. And so Rowan Williams makes the point. So the spell ultimately destroys the person. I think Lewis in the storybook, you almost have Jadis, the White Witch, the queen, this sort of great and terrible, beautiful creature that knows herself. So there's kind of a narrow escape there. Aslan gives a growl and saves Lucy from something terrible. And again, we have kind of a parallel to the desire for gold, right? The desire for beauty. And so in some ways, there's a parallel to Eustace's story with treasure, and Lucy with this desire for beauty. Then we have the spell that allows you to hear what your friends think about you. And Aslan later describes that as spying on people. And she says, oh, I didn't think it was eavesdropping if it was using magic. And he says, it doesn't matter what the method is, it's still spying.
The other thing I found interesting about that whole section was, well, I didn't do the other spell that I really, really, really wanted to do.
Right.
So, and this one is, minor compared to that. So
Right.
I should be able to do it. It's
So
okay.
is that screw tape and wormwood at work in that moment?
And ourselves. And Lucy herself.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what does she hear? As she listens to her friends on the train, what is it that she hears?
Well, it sounds like, the other girl was only hanging out with her out of pity kind of thing, and that she's not going to do it anymore.
Right. So she's kind of name called and her trust abandoned. She's pretty angry, pretty hurt. And what is it that Aslan says later on?
Well, he tells her the truth of what's behind what the girl was saying. That she was actually lying just to tell the other girl what she wanted to hear.
Right? She's weaker.
Yeah.
She's too weak to say what she meant to the older girl. And so we have maybe one of the reasons why we shouldn't eavesdrop on conversations. Things that we aren't meant to hear are not necessarily for our profit, although we seem to always think that they would be.
Mm-hmm.
And our media would tell us again and again, they're really not. We have this neat little exchange between Lucy and Aslan, and he says, you made me visible. And she says, oh, Aslan, stop teasing. There's nothing I could do that would make you visible. And Aslan says, do you think I wouldn't obey my own rules? So what's all that about?
Well, the bottom line is he was in control of the whole situation and including the magic spells. And if that spell is going to make everything invisible, then it's going to make everything invisible, including us.
Right. So she's right at one level. Fundamentally, she does not have the power to do anything to Aslan. But Aslan is incarnate in Narnia. He is in human flesh, as it were, in a lion's flesh. He's a real lion. He is an actual lion in the story, as we saw from Bree and Horse and His Boy. And as such, he submits himself to the order of creation, Narnian creation in this case. And so that's what he means. I don't break my own rules, right? Same with Jesus. Jesus is killed on a cross. He truly dies because he also has to be obedient to the dynamics of his creation, the way the creation is made. So it's similar to the conversation when the witch asks Aslan, "How do I know you won't back out of this deal?" He has to be. And some of the children saying, "Well, do we have to make a deal? Like, can't we just not hand Edmund over as a traitor?" And he has that growl of disapproval because we have to be obedient to the way the world works. We have to move with creation, right? So that's a part of what's going on here. And then, of course, Aslan never tells us what would have happened. And when he tells us what will happen, if. Well, I think that's good there. They're funny, stupid little creatures. The magician is good. And they will continue to be in relationship. And someday they may develop into mature dwarves, single-footed dwarves or dufflepods, and can look after their own welfare. We have the Dark Island coming up where dreams come to life. They escape it and they recognize that they have nothing to fear, and they never did. Although fear has all but destroyed Lord Roop. Then we have the end of the book. So we have the three sleepers. Is there anything you wanted to talk about in the last couple of chapters? We have Aslan's table.
Well, there's just that whole theme throughout for me of all the books is that, and it's kind of what I said a few minutes ago, God is in control and he can see the beginning and the end.
Yeah.
We can't see all the in-between things, but there's a theme that's running through everything. Like the table's there now because they've been traveling so long, they're out of food, they're almost out of water. They need this respite.
Yeah. Yes.
And there it is, it's being provided.
Yes.
And But what happened to the three lords who were sitting there? They never ate the food. They started arguing over the sword
Right.
or the knife on the table.
Yeah. And what did you think of the knife? This is the stone knife that slayed Aslan, and it is
Yeah.
being kept in honor on Aslan's table. What do you think of that?
They go together. Yeah,
Well-
well, that, it's like Christ's crucifixion, right? That's something to be remembered and revered and
When the instrument
honored.
of death itself becomes sacred,
Mhm.
interestingly enough. Well, and we have the give us this day our daily bread. Aslan's table is replenished every day.
Mhm. The other thing that I thought was very interesting was when the birds come
Yes.
and it's like he has the image they give us is that it looked like a burning coal.
Yes.
And it made me think of, I think it's Isaiah.
Isaiah 6.
Yeah. And, I'm a man of unclean lips.
Yes.
Although
Which
that
happened.
wasn't the purpose in this case, but just that's what it reminded me of.
But I think that's a good connection you're making, because they are sailing towards Aslan's country, right? So in some ways, they are being purged. There's a purgatory happening. There's a refining that is going on. And even the who can proceed is narrowing down and down and down. And it's Reepicheep is ultimately the one who is able to get into Aslan's country, because he is kind of like the Elijah, is taken up. Enoch walked with God and he was no more. He's taken up. So Reepicheep, and he'll reappear in the last battle. So there is this purgation that is coming along here. So I think what you're seeing is a really good thing to see. Even the end of fear, right? As they leave the island, they see the shape of a cross that looks like an airplane. Then it's an albatross. The albatross is an ancient symbol for Christ. And it's Aslan's voice that whispers, "Take heart, dear one," and then they recognize they have nothing to fear. There's the attempted mutiny, and then Caspian says that the question isn't will you come with us, it's who is going to get to come with us. And nobody can continue on this journey without desiring it. Like nobody could be carried by them against their will. They have to decide. So yeah, I think your observation is a good one. And Ramandu is a star, a retired star.
Yeah, and so is the magician.
Right. Yeah.
Not necessarily a retired star. He says he's not.
Yeah.
Something else. But I thought that was interesting. And in my mind, I always equate stars with angels.
Right. Okay. And for Lewis, who's an authority on Renaissance and medieval cosmology, the stars are the powers or influence in this world. So the stars, everything beyond the moon is on God's side of things. They're fixed and they're regular, whereas everything on this side of the moon is unfixed, is changeable, which is why sin is part of the problem. But the stars are in their courses. They are obedient to God. They are regular. And so that's why in some ways they govern. They have an influence in their heavenly spheres on the activities of humanity. including the Dawn Treader. And it's why they are fit to govern as well. More on that, you should read Michael Ward's Planet Narnia, a really interesting read. In our world, said Eustace, a star is a huge ball of flaming gas. Even in your world, my son, that is not what a star is, but only what it is made of. And in this world, you have already met a star, for I think you have been with Korakin. So this is Lewis in his work, The Discarded Image. And we saw it in Letters to Malcolm. It's the subbing out of the old cosmology for the new. And Lewis says, what we don't seem to realize is that this new cosmology, Newtonian, is just as much of a construct as the old one. But there are advantages in the old one and disadvantages in the new one, even as the new one would say there's disadvantages in the old one. And so, where we reduce everything down to fact, a star is a great flaming ball of gas. Well, that's what a star is made of, but that's not what a star is. And so Lewis is bringing that kind of a thought in here. Eustace has been interested in books of facts and weights and measures and ships and all this sort of stuff. He knows about consonants, and yet he doesn't have the proper content, because while he has gathered facts about the world, he has not learned to live in the world until now. So I think Lewis is encouraging us as readers to not reject the new cosmology or the way the world is, but as he says, we need to read the old books, because the old books help us to see a different way of being. New books can do it too. We just don't have access to those things. But we carry blinders. The blinders are put on us because we receive the world. We have this formation. Eustace has this formation. He is blind to himself, even as he sees the world in a very limited way. It's by becoming a dragon, it's by being with the Dawn Treader that those blinders begin to come off. And it's the same thing that's happening as we read these books. It is encouraging us to have our blinders taken off about the way we look at the world. 8:33. Well, they find out that Narnia is flat and that Earth is round, and they are flabbergasted. The water becomes sweet, and Reepicheep enters Aslan's country, and then the children return to their own world.
And Lucy and Edmund are also told that they won't be coming back.
Right. And we have the lamb on the shore.
Cooking breakfast.
Another John reference.
You mentioned the time about Peter and,
Yeah.
when Christ was cooking breakfast.
Yeah.
And this just reminded me of that.
Yes, well, it's meant to. Yeah. So, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, my friends. I'm going to shut off the recording.